All right, let's talk some college hoops, shall we? And our guy, Isaac Trotter, doing great work for 24/7 Sports. Last week, he put the Big Ten into tiers, basketball tiers. Who are the title contenders? Who could be maybe a sneaky kind of team to sneak up into the top 4, top 5, whatever it is. This is going to get a lot tougher when 18 teams are in it. But doing this exercise, Isaac, with 14 teams with the state of the Big Ten, how hard was this, and what'd you learn doing it?
Man, I feel like I entered it going, all right, I really like a few teams. And then afterward, I'm like, maybe I only like one team. I really like Purdue. I think like you go into it thinking about it. And then afterward, you kind of leave going, okay, I really like Purdue. And then after that, you could give me a list of 14 teams in any order. And I'd probably be like, yeah, all right, I can see it. So this conference is going to be really, really fascinating. But I think splitting it into tiers does help a little bit. We went with 4 different tiers: one title contender, middle of the pack. Third was our NCAA tournament bubble. And then the tier 4 was the basement. And like what I was kind of looking for with those title contenders is, one all Big Ten guy, a lot of depth, and like cohesiveness, and preferably a little bit of everything. And it's kind of weird how many teams actually fit like those, benchmarks. So the Big Ten, you feel really good about Purdue at the top, and then you feel kind of iffy about the teams in the middle. But actually, a lot of teams have like the bones to potentially make a run. Will they? No. Like we'll see. But like it's pretty interesting when you kind of break it up like that.
It's one thing to compete for a Big Ten championship. Does this conference have got teams that can make the Final Four, Isaac, as you look at it?
I think Purdue definitely can. I think a lot of people, we talked about COVID brain a lot. I think March Madness brain is a really important thing. So people freak out about what they just see. And I think as we get farther and away from March Madness, the more I look at Purdue and going, yeah, this team has a chance to really get back there and make a really deep run. Can they pull a Virginia that loses early to a 16 seed and then wins the national title the next year? I don't know. But I think this team's going to be a lot better than what they were last year, and they were really good. Michigan State, I don't know if they're a regular season Big Ten champion. I think that's maybe my concern with them on a day-to-day basis. But they got the guards, man. They have the guards. And so I think you enter the season going, those two teams are the ones that you feel most confident about. And then there's like a few others where you're like, I could see where this comes together. But I think it's irresponsible to put any other than Michigan State and Purdue in that national title contender right now here in, what are we, early September?
Yeah, and I'm not going to predict Purdue's going to do the Virginia thing. You lose to a 16 seed, and then all of a sudden you win the championship. But they're good enough. They are good enough. Their guards will be sophomores now, and they were really impressive. Zach Edey is just a cheat code to get you to a number 1 or number 2 seed and potentially a Big Ten championship. I like Michigan State probably more in the NCAA tournament than in the Big Ten scheme of things because of their guard play, because of Izzo, because of front court depth. Those are the 2 teams I feel good about. The rest of it, Isaac, feels like it could go a lot of different ways with all these other teams.
It totally is. And so Purdue and Michigan State were in my tier 1. And then, this exercise was a little bit tough because you could make a case about a lot of teams in tier 2 to potentially also be in tier 1 and vice versa. But I put Illinois, Maryland, and Wisconsin in that tier 1 alongside with them, just because when I went back to my parameters, I go, all right, all Big Ten candidate. And I look at Illinois and I go, okay, you got one in Terrence Shannon. Cohesiveness. Yeah, when you're returning this amount of starters, that makes a lot of sense. Depth. I think Illinois has that. So I put them in there. Maryland, I'm looking for an all Big Ten candidate. Well, they might have 2, Jameer Young and Julian Reese. Those are 2 guys. They have a little depth is a little bit of a question, but they have a ton of cohesiveness. I think when you have your 3 of your best 4 players come back, when you throw Dante Scott in, and then they have a great recruiting class come in. And then Wisconsin, it's like, okay, they're all Big Ten candidate. Maybe I'm fudging it a little bit there, but Tyler Wall, when healthy, he was an all Big Ten candidate last year, right? And then you have the cohesiveness. You have all 5 starters come back. You get a really big time addition out of the transfer portal and AJ Store. So it's like those teams right there. Maybe they're not in like that national title tier with Purdue and Michigan State, but they're definitely tier 1 in like the Big Ten title contenders. Because you compare them to the rest of the pack, I think there's some separation there. So those are the 5 that I have in tier 1. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised if any of those teams would win it. Now, would I pick Purdue? Obviously, yeah. But I wouldn't be stunned if I see Wisconsin, 15-5 in Big Ten play when they get all 5 starters back.
All right, since this is the Illinois podcast, I got to ask you a little bit more in depth. You answered a little bit of this, but you have Illinois as a tier 1 title contender. I think Illinois fans would feel better about that with a certain point guard that went to Baylor. But why? Why do you still have Illinois as a title contender?
Yeah, I just keep going back to the depth, and I think that really matters. And then star power. Illinois has two arguably top 10 players in the Big Ten. That not a lot of other teams can say that. Terrence Shannon and Coleman Hawkins. I think Coleman Hawkins, all defensive team, is a lock. I think he's a defensive player of the year candidate, if not front runner, entering the season. And then Terrence Shannon Jr., there's not a wing like him in the rest of the conference. He is the clear alpha of all the other wings. I think he has a great chance to win Big Ten Player of the Year if Zach Edey wasn't around, right? And so you're probably entering the season going, hey, we have probably the second best player in the league. And, I think a lot of people with Illinois have talked about, oh, they can't shoot threes, and that's a problem. The thing I've been thinking about a lot is, what if free throw percentage is the most important stat for this team? Because you can have an elite offense if you're elite at the rim and also shoot a lot of free throws and make a lot of free throws. Illinois was elite at the rim. Illinois shot a lot of free throws. They just didn't make enough of them. And so I think that this team, Terrence Shannon Jr. is going to shoot a ton of free throws. Dane Danger is going to shoot a lot of free throws. Quincy Guerrier is going to shoot free throws. Like, you have a lot of the pieces to shoot a lot of free throws and get a lot of really good looks at the rim. And those two things are really impactful to having a really good offense. Purdue did not shoot it good from three last year, but they were great at the free throw line and they were great at the rim. And so, those are the things that I keep looking at with this team. Offensively, if you can get, that 3-point volume of threes down a little bit, where you're taking better ones and not quite as many of the tough fadeaway 27-footers off of 1 foot. If you can get better quality looks in the paint, I think there's a path for Illinois to be good offensively. But if this team wants to win the Big Ten, I think they have to do it with defense and depth. Defensively, I think that there are scheme fits that maybe you feel more confident in, like with what Purdue could do defensively. But I think Illinois can cause the most havoc defensively of any team in the Big Ten. They should be able to force a ton of turnovers. Their on-ball defense should be terrific. Their length, their strength, I think you should really be able to feel them. And I think that plays over a long period of Big Ten play. So I think you have to put them in tier one. Are they the favorite? No. Should they be the favorite? No. But I think there's a really high floor with this team that kind of gets overlooked, because everyone thinks about is oh, got to make the Sweet 16. Oh man, they don't shoot threes well enough. Oh, they only shot 29%. Oh, their catch and shoot numbers were abysmal last year. I think there's a higher floor with this group than people realize. The range of outcomes with Illinois really isn't that crazy, honestly.
Yeah, I think the higher floor is not what fans are concerned about, but it is nice they have it, right? I think this is an NCAA tournament team. I think this is going to be a great defensive team. Making free throws and making threes is important. If they want to reach what their ceiling is going to be, they have to do those things. You mentioned Shannon. He's going to make them. The question is, does Danger, does Rogers, right? Do those guys make their free throws moving forward? And do they get enough out of the point guard position to reach a ceiling that Illinois didn't reach last year?
Yeah. And, I think the other thing too is that in order to get more of those free throws, in order to get more of those shots at the rim, you got to force turnovers. And that's where I think with this group, with the depth that they've added, if they're really going to play, 8, 9, 10 guys that you feel pretty good about, you have to play with some force defensively. And so I felt like sometimes Illinois was always in react mode. I was watching today, some of the Penn State film, and they're constantly reacting to what Penn State is doing to you. And I think Illinois needs to dictate that a little bit more on the defensive end this year. And when you have that depth, and if you're having guys that you have 5, 6 guys that are probably going to play 20-ish minutes a game, when you're out there for those 20 minutes, it's as all you got for those 20 minutes. And so I think if you can get more transition looks, this team should be awesome on the glass too. That's another underrated part about this team. Never get out rebounded. You should be able to get a ton of second chance opportunities. And if you can get out in transition and you don't turn the basketball over and you just get shots up at the rim, and you give yourself a chance to get those offensive rebounds, get to the free throw line, that's the path. And so I think maybe my concern with this team is the turnovers is a really big question mark for me. If they're turning the basketball over, whether that's Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, whether that's Ty Rodgers, I just feel like that's really rough. And if you're going to the free throw line going 0 for 2 or 1 for 2, that almost feels like a turnover sometimes too.
Yeah. This team's going to be really interesting to watch, but they can play a role in this title chase. Michigan State, Maryland, Wisconsin, also in that tier one. Maryland, their starting lineup is really good. And as you said, this kind of feels like a back to normal Wisconsin team, that they return everybody. Maybe there's not a star there, but I just think their floor is extremely high, and it might be a team that sneaks up on people. what are the paths to a title for those teams?
Yeah, I think for Maryland, I feel a little bit like Maryland is a sneaky Purdue type of look with what they do. Like a lot of people were a little hesitant to buy in on Purdue last year because they're playing 2 freshmen. I think that's kind of the same thing with Maryland this year. Like a few people are like, the freshmen, like you have 2 of them in the starting lineup, Jamie Kaiser and Deshaun Harris-Smith. But I think when you have the ecosystem of having 3 veterans in there with Julian Reese, Dante Scott, and Jameer Young, that makes the life so much easier for those freshmen. I expect Harris Smith and Kaiser to be awesome. And their summers, the noise coming out of Maryland has been really good about both of those guys. So you do have questions about their depth. Losing Ian Martinez to Utah State's a little bit weird. That was an odd one, especially when he might have to get a waiver to even play this year. They've had some injuries. Chance Stevens was a guy they really liked, and he's going to be out for, if not the whole season, probably all of the seasons there. So their guard depth is a question, but Jordan Geronimo, you like him too. And I think if you're Maryland going, how do we win the Big Ten title? It's Jameer Young's the best point guard in the league. Julian Reese is hands down the second best big man in the league, which is possible. And then you have maybe the best freshman in the league too, with one of Deshaun Harris-Smith or Jamie Kaiser. And that type of path there could be good. Wisconsin, on the other hand, I feel like Chucky Hepburn had a year from hell. He had a really tough thing with his close friend, basically his brother dying. Like that really was impactful. It would be very inhumane of us not to think that is something that could really affect you mentally. I think that he can get back to being the player that we want him or think he can be. And I think having the established roles now should be a lot better. And, Wisconsin, the reason why Illinois has dominated Wisconsin the last few years is they've out-athleted them on every level. And so I think getting AJ Storr in there is a big difference because he just pops. I mean, he's a Chicago kid, and at St. John's had a really good freshman season. And, Wisconsin's going to play slower than St. John's, so I'm not expecting him to have a dominant alpha role. But I think he could be really good. And if Connor Sejan takes a step, you really like that team. And, Stephen Crowell and Tyler Wall are familiar names, but they can be high impact big men. So I think if you're looking at Wisconsin, you're going, okay, they're going to be awesome at home. They have a lot of veterans that know how to win on the road. Can you get to 500 on the road in the Big Ten when you're going to be awesome at home? That's kind of the recipe to having a really, really good season. And I just like their top 6 a lot. I think Chucky is a good point guard. I think AJ Storr could be really good. Asian was giving teams so many issues. Crowell and Wall are just difference makers defensively. And, the depth is a question, but Max Klesmit is a guy that could potentially bring off the bench, who I thought was pretty good last year in a complementary role. And, they like some of these freshmen. We'll see how much they can carve out a role and play. But this is a team that has the depth to be pretty darn good, and that cohesiveness. I just feel like they're going to come out guns blazing right away with this cohesive unit and with Wall healthy. I don't think there's going to be a lot of hiccups early for Wisconsin.
I want to take a minute and tell you about Home Field. They are a premium collegiate apparel brand based in Indianapolis. They emphasize their commitment to creating incredibly comfortable, officially licensed apparel with vintage college designs. They feature a growing collection of over 150 plus colleges to choose from, including, of course, the University of Illinois. Home Field designs are super unique, guys, because they delve into the archives and history of each school, including Illinois, and they use unique logos and iconic moments to create thoughtfully designed apparel. So if you go to homefieldapparel.com, you can see the 80s Illini football helmet that so many like, Flying Illini logo, the Illinois basketball logo from the 2004-2005 Illini team. The script Illini is there. And you guys, these are the most comfortable shirts. And that's what I love about Home Field Apparel. You get the comfort, but you also get authenticity and nostalgia. So I'm telling you guys, give their site a look. It's not the typical Illinois gear you usually see. You can find them at homefieldapparel.com, where you can see their collection of colleges available. And guess what? Our listeners at Illini Inquirer get 15% off their first order with discount code Illini23. Again, 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com with discount code Illini23. So, as you go to Illinois football games, get ready for the Illinois basketball season, Home Field Apparel is the perfect apparel to get you ready for the upcoming season. So check them out at homefieldapparel.com. I'm very excited to announce a new partnership with Underdog Fantasy. We decided to partner with Underdog because it's the easiest place to play fantasy sports. It's also the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry. Underdog Fantasy has a lot to offer, including their Pick'em game. In Pick'em, you pick whether your favorite players will have a higher or lower stat total in this week's game for a chance to win big. It's so easy to play. Just pick 2 to 5 stats of your favorite players and choose whether they'll go higher or lower. You can more than 20 times your amount of money by going 5 for 5. They also have a Best Ball Mania. If you think you know football, you got to check this one out. This year's Best Ball Mania has $50 million in total prizes up for grabs, with the winner taking home $3 million. So sign up today with promo code Illini and get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store. And don't forget to register with my promo code Illini to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. You must be 18 plus and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-522-4700 or visit ncpgambling.org. Can I guess which fan base was on you the most about this list?
Yeah, let's see it.
Indiana?
Yeah, they definitely were.
Why did Indiana not make your cut for tier 1?
Yeah, I don't know, man. Like, I have a hard time with the roster construction. I think I think we're kind of heading into this year where Indiana has as much pro talent, if not more, than most of the teams in the league. Mackenzie Mgbako is a big-time get. Khalil Ware, a lot of talent there. Malik Renew is a guy that a lot of people really like. But I think that the floor of this crew is like not really being discussed at all. Like there's an outcome where it falls apart for Indiana because they got power forwards on power forwards on power forwards, like Michigan.
In the year 2023, yes. Like it's just a roster full of back to the basket, maybe face up from 10 feet power forwards.
It really is. And so it's like, you don't have a lot of high volume 3-point shooters on this roster either. So I think if you're game planning against Indiana, it's like, hey, let's go under every ball screen. Let's make Trey Galloway and Xavier Johnson make tough twos. Let's, force Khalil Ware into playing ISO ball and see what he gives you a little bit. And so, I think that this team could be decent if CJ Gunn or Caleb Banks starts to step up and can assert themselves as a 3, and they're able to shift Mackenzie Mgbako to the 4 and have a tough conversation with the guys after that. Because, Khalil Ware's summer has not been going great at all. Malik Renew has had a lot of upside, but we'll see if that can really, really translate. Peyton Sparks is a guy I really like out of Ball State, but will he play, or are they going to be like, hey, let's give Khalil Ware his time? So I feel like there's a floor with this team that people don't necessarily think about because like you think, okay, Xavier Johnson, Trey Galloway, they're going to be good defensively. You like some of their pieces. They got high upside NBA guys. They'll be good, right? Well, what if they can't shoot? And what if they can't generate good offense because the geography on the floor is just like completely different because there's nobody that they have to respect. So I think defensively they should be okay. I trust Mike Woodson to be really good, but putting them in that tier 1, like who's their all Big Ten caliber, 100% all Big Ten guy? I don't know if they have that type of player. Maybe Xavier Johnson gets back to it, but that's what kind of kept them out of tier 1 for me.
And Trey Jackson-Davis was very, 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 very good last year, and they lose him. Yeah, the Illinois-Indiana battles might be in the 50s or 40s this year. That could be back to Weber ball in that one. All right, you are a believer in Northwestern. You got Northwestern tier 2. Why are you buying the Wildcats?
Well, I think you kind of look at it from this perspective. Boo Buie coming back is great. They were able to retain their coaching staff, which I think is really important for the defensive schemes. And then I really like Matt Nicholson. I think Matt Nicholson was one of the best defensive big men in the league last year. And I think when you have that type of anchor, makes your life so much easier. It's like, hey, like you're kind of putting different guys into those roles, but it's pretty easy when Nicholson is behind you to make your life easier. And, I liked Brooks Barnhizer a lot. I think he's a really talented guy. I think Ty Berry's going to shoot it way better than 30% or 29% that he shot last year. So he's good. And then they went out in the portal and added perfect scheme fits for what they want. Ryan Langboard is a kid that they got out of Princeton who shot the absolute cover off the ball, and Northwestern and Princeton have a lot of those same similarities with what they want to do offensively. So I think he's going to be a really good piece for them. And Justin Mullins is another kid out of the University of Denver, I believe, who he looks like a Chase Audige clone, like defensively, like just arms and legs and just aggressive and wants to get in the passing lane. So I just feel like when you have an all Big Ten point guard like Boo Buie, who could be the best lead guard in the Big Ten, and you have that defensive like presence and scheme and anchor and Matt Nicholson, that's a really high floor team. I think that, Ty Berry, Brooks Barnheiser have to take a step forward, but they can be pretty solid. I don't expect them to, be tied for second in the Big Ten like they were last year, but they should be an NCAA tournament team like that. They can make the NCAA tournament if they get the right bounces and the right growths from some of their supporting cast members.
Tier 3 is, I think, where the strength of the Big Ten is, because these are teams that could all make the NCAA tournament. And I think you have it right. This is what you labeled the NCAA tournament bubble teams. Michigan, after such a disappointing year. Rutgers, after losing some key pieces of the transfer portal. Ohio State, after showing real signs of life late in the season of the Big Ten tournament. Iowa, obviously going through some changes. And then Nebraska, which has been pretty good in the transfer portal and ended the season well. So who do you like the most out of that group?
I think I'm closer to being bought in on Rutgers just because of their age. You have Noah Fernandez was a transfer out of UMass who I really liked. His film is excellent. I think he's going to be pretty good. And Cliff Omarui, you feel pretty good about that base. And then Peichel is just going to grind you away to a pretty good year. So I feel pretty good about that team. Obviously I'd feel way better if Cam Spencer was around. I'm not really sure that Paul Mulcahy was a huge loss for them. Good player, but I don't think he was a huge loss for them. And if Derek Simpson starts to take over as the breakout candidate in the Big Ten, I think you start to feel pretty good about that team. The other team in Tier 3 that I keep liking, and it wouldn't be me if I didn't like Ohio State, right? I just have to. It's like a rite of passage. If I watch a lot of Big Ten basketball, I have to like Ohio State, but they're super young. They got 10 sophomores or freshmen out of their 13 scholarship players. So, you get Jamison Battle in there, you get Dale Bonner. Both of those guys, I think, will help them. I think they both should start. But if this team wants to be good, their young guys have to be great. And, Scotty Middleton is a freshman that they love. Tyson Chapman is a guy that is a big-time shot maker as a freshman who is super smooth and should be able to be good. But if they want to be awesome, it's because these sophomores are good. Bruce Thornton looked like a beast last year. Roddy Gale had a Big Ten tournament for the ages. He was great. And then Felix Okpara, another rising center that, it takes big men a little bit of time, but man, toward the end of the year, you start to see him becoming a piece. And underrated guy here, Penn State transfer Evan Mahaffey. I thought he was awesome for Penn State, did a lot of really great things for them as a supporting cast member. I think he's going to find a way to crack this rotation as well. So Ohio State has a ton of talent. You're kind of banking on Chris Holtmann to get things right. And if so, they need these sophomores to be all right, you were good last year as good Big Ten freshmen. Now as sophomores, you can't have the RJ Melendez sophomore year. You kind of have to have the, where you are a really, really good Big Ten player for Ohio State to reach their goals.
I think I like the talent of Ohio State the most. Nebraska would not surprise me. My Tominaga love, but Bryce Williams is a really good addition. Rink Mass, a solid addition. I don't know if they have enough talent to be a certain NCAA tournament team, but I think it's going to be a competitive year for them. Iowa's the team I just want to highlight here. Perkins is back, Sanford's back, but there's so much change there. But I respect the heck out of Fran McCaffrey. What do you think of that roster?
Yeah, it's weird. They swung big for some guys in the portal and just didn't get them. I thought Grant Nelson was a player that would have made a lot of sense for him to go there. And Alabama, I think, won the bidding contest there a little bit for that one. But I thought he would have made a ton of sense there. And so you kind of enter this season I like Perkins. I think Illinois fans obviously saw what Perkins can do in a game. And Peyton Sanford is really good. But it feels like they have a lot of trust in some of their young guys to come in and play well. And this isn't a recruiting class that was super heralded from a recruiting rankings perspective. But Owen Freeman had a really good performance in the summer. I think he's a guy that could potentially help them at the 5. Price Sanford, another white kid who's going to come in and shoot the cover off the ball. It seems like a typical Iowa guy. And Brock Harding, another freshman. I don't think he has the same opportunity that Braden Smith had last year at Purdue, but they have a lot of similarities in their games. So I think you could potentially see him kind of knock his way into the mix. And Josh Dix is another kid that they're pretty high on as well. So, you kind of go into this thing going, how does Iowa get there? But I also have a weird, I know what Iowa's going to be. I just know they're going to be good offensively. So it's you have a trust of what Iowa basketball will look like, but it feels like they need Ben Creaky out of Valpo to be awesome. Can he be? I think so, but there's some concerns too about like it does his game translate. And then Patrick McCaffrey was a guy I really, really liked heading into last year, maybe too much. And then it just didn't work out. And the mental health, he took a leave of absence from the team from mental health. Hopefully he's back to his best version of himself and can play because he's really talented. Like he's a really talented guy. And so if he can get back to being like what we thought he might be, like a top 20, 25 Big Ten player, I think you could have a different conversation about Iowa. But defensively, ooh, boy, like this roster, like I thought they could take a step last year defensively. I don't know how this team is good defensively this year. That's just, they don't have any rim protection, very little rim protection, very little wing defenders that you really like, very little switchability. It could be really rough defensively for a team that does not pride itself on the defensive end of the floor.
Can I bring up a big topic here? This feels like a big year for Juwan Howard. Doesn't it?
Really big year.
I mean, this is kind of a weird roster. You lose Hunter Dickinson. Obviously, you've lost talent to the NBA as well. You have talent. It's kind of a weird collection of guys. You know, Terrace Reed, I think, is a really good player. Terrence Williams was not the breakout candidate everyone thought he was going to be. Namari Burnett's on his third school here. The transfer from Tennessee, I'll let you pronounce his name. And Doug McDaniel was a nice player, bright spot for them last year. But there's some talent there, but it's been a disappointing team the last 2 years, outside of the obviously NCAA tournament run 2 years ago. But still, like this feels like a big year for Michigan and Juwan Howard to kind of establish themselves. But do they have the roster to do it?
Yeah, Juwan Howard built a roster that a 1990s big man would really like because they got a lot of power forwards, a whole lot of them.
Guys who played in the 80s and 90s that are now coaching their former programs, kind of doing something similar there with Indiana and Michigan.
A little bit. All right, you want the power forward rundown? Let's do it. Trey Jackson, power forward out of Seton Hall. Now he's at Michigan. Olivier Kamwa out of Tennessee, power forward. Really like him. Jace Howard played a lot of his minutes at the 4. That's 3. Terrence Williams, I think he could be considered a 3, but he played the 4 a lot last year. We'll throw him in. Will Cheddar, my guy from Minnesota, that's a 5th power forward. Another power forward is Lee Aliyah, a kid out of Argentina. So that's 6 right there. So that's a lot of power forwards. And then you could throw in Terrace Reed in there as well. Like he played a little bit of the 4 last year with Hunter Dickinson. So they got a lot of power forwards with this team. The question with them, though, is how did the new guys coalesce? I think there's a little bit of, this team feels like Hunter Dickinson left them. And so I think that there's a little chip on their shoulder of like, hey, we got a little bit spurned here by our best player. And he was wrong. We're going to get the culture back. Like, we're going to start playing a little bit better. And so, you need Kamwa to be awesome. And, in his limited sample size, not limited, he played a decent role, but he didn't have a huge role at Tennessee. His usage rate was solid, but not anything spectacular. And he played like 25-ish minutes a game. He was really good for them. And that ecosystem at Tennessee offensively is not the same as Michigan. You can say whatever you want about Juwan Howard, but they run really good offensive sets. Mm-hmm. And Kamwa is going to come into a completely different, scenario there. It just feels like there's a lot riding on Doug McDaniel and Terrace Reed to take those sophomore surges. Namari Burnett has never been healthy. And when he has been healthy, he hasn't been all that impactful. They need him to be a dude. And it feels like the spacing with this team could be a little bit iffy as well. If you're trotting out, Terrence Williams at the 3, Kamwa at the 4, Terrace Reed at the 5, those are some questions there, but they should be good on the glass. I mean, when you have this much front court depth, you should be good on the glass. It just feels like, Doug McDaniel needs to be good, and they need a bounce back season from Jalen Llewellyn. They were really excited about him out of the portal. He gets hurt. He wasn't really good, honestly, early in the year. Then he got hurt. They need him to be really good and step into it because I think they can mitigate some of their spacing concerns if they can play some of these 2-point guard lineups with Llewellyn and McDaniel on the floor together.
All right, in your tier 4, the basement of the Big Ten, 2 teams that kind of are familiar with it, though. Mike Rhodes now at Penn State. Illinois fans certainly happy to see Micah Shrewsbury gone and now at Notre Dame. But they're going through a big transition. Then Minnesota. Speaking of big year for coaches, huge year for Ben Johnson to show something, anything.
Yeah. Penn State for me, I love Ace Baldwin. I think Ace Baldwin's awesome. I think a lot of Big Ten teams are going to really like him. Zach Hicks is a kid out of Temple. He's like the perfect Isaac Trotter player, 6'8", can shoot threes. I don't know if he can dribble. It's like perfect. It's exactly what I like. So he's gonna be a guy that I think could have a decent year. And then after that, it's just like a lot of questions. Kanye Clary, killed Illinois at times last year with his speed. So I think you could see a lot of small lineups with Clary and Ace Baldwin together. That's kind of fun. I think they should both get in the lane a lot, but it feels like the rest of this roster has a lot of interesting pieces. Raquandis Mitchell, like he comes from Kansas City, and that was one of the worst teams in all of college basketball last year. He took 1 billion shots for them. Can he get back to that? We'll see. Nick Kern, VCU transfer, Puff Johnson, and DeMarco Dunn are 2 guys out of North Carolina that just never got their opportunities. So this is a big road for them. But, I think you looked at, you look at what Jerome Tang did at Kansas State. And it's like, how did he build like a Big 12 basement team into like an Elite 8 team? They were top 5 at one point last year. And it's because they kind of got a little bit lucky that Keontae Johnson was like an alpha dog. And then Marquise Noel was like, arguably one of the best point guards in the Big 12. I don't think you see that with Penn State. Like, I just don't see that type of roster unless Zach Hicks turns into something that I didn't know. Right. And then with Minnesota, when we were talking about this pre-show, it's weird how many pieces about Minnesota I kind of like. Like, I'm not supposed to like some of these individual pieces. Like Mike Mitchell Jr., their transfer out of Pepperdine. The film is really good. Like, it's really good. He knocked out a ton of threes. You see a lot of bursts there from him. Pharrell Payne, like, I think if he played on a bigger stage, people would love him. He's a freshman big man that's just not scared of anybody, just a dog. Like, he's a beast. And then, say what you want about him, but Dawson Garcia is super talented. But after that, it's like, what else do we got? Like, It feels like, Minnesota wants to be this player development program, and then they lose Jaden Henley to DePaul, who was a really great piece for them, played a ton as a freshman for him, and transferred to DePaul. Like, you can't lose pieces like that. And so, they've had a ton of injury issues. Parker Fox and Isaiah Enon are 2 front court pieces for them that they need to be healthy. They both missed last year and the year before for Fox with injuries. You have Elijah Hawkins coming in out of Howard. He's tiny, like 5'8", skitterbug, can really shoot it though. And then it feels like some of these young freshmen, Cam Christie, we know the Christie name pretty well. They need him to come in and be a piece for them right away. And Braden Carrington is another one that had a decent freshman year, but you're just not really sure. And it feels like you can I can talk myself into the individual strengths of Mike Mitchell and Dawson Garcia and Pharrell Payne. But it's like, what is this together? Like, and so that's my question with Ben Johnson. It feels like they don't have an identity, and it's entering year 4, and they still don't have an identity. I don't know. It just feels like, Minnesota, I don't know if they really feel like they need to get rid of him after this year, but it just feels like they need to do something to get some form of identity, fostered, and constantly having guys in and out and up and down and freshmen that you like come in and then leave for random other teams that aren't that good just doesn't feel like the way.
Next year, UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington are coming into the league. You cover all of it now. Isaac, what are they bringing to the league? How does the Big Ten look different when those teams come in? It's going to be amazing. Like, what do we consider a success moving forward? Like, is top 6 or top 7? Is that like, what we've considered top 3 or top 4 before? Because there's so many dang teams and so many good teams.
Yeah. Do you split it into half and like call it divisions and like do it like that for basketball, like the NBA? Like, I don't know. I think with UCLA and USC, especially, recruiting is going to be like the big thing to watch. USC has stacked 2 top 10 recruiting classes on top of each other. They have Isaiah Collier coming in, and in this class right now, he won't be here next year. Hopefully, they're hoping that he goes pro. But I mean, Andy Enfield's done a great job recruiting, and he gets the alphas in state, or in the United States. UCLA has pivoted big time into the international route. So they've gone overseas and buffed up their recruiting over there and landed some absolute studs. Burke Blaine Tensile, I don't even know how to say his last name. He's awesome. Ade Mara is a kid that they have coming in this year. 7'3", 240, looks like Zach Edey, except he can whip behind the back passes. Like, it's like absurd. And so they're going to be a really talented team that always recruits well, but I think they're going to do it from an international perspective now and moving forward. And then Oregon and Washington, I feel like they're kind of those like tier 2, tier 3 teams. Unfortunately, Oregon has taken a big step back. They've missed the NCAA tournament now back-to-back years for the first time in a decade under Dana Altman. That's kind of stunning. And the recruiting just hasn't been there. They thought they had some big-time additions coming out of the portal and didn't get it done. And Washington kind of the same way. Mike Hopkins feels like a make-or-break year, and he's loaded up on, old guys. Paul Mulcahy's out there now, but it's like, there feels like they haven't really been able to separate themselves or establish any sort of culture.
So Big Ten going into this year, Isaac, last question for you. Where's it rank among the conferences since you've done all these tiers for all these conferences?
Yeah, so for right now, I think I have the Big 12. I still like the top end talent at the Big 12 that they have. The SEC, the middle of the SEC is a big question mark, so I don't go there. Big East, the top of the league is awesome. I'd have the Big 10 like second or third. I think the depth of the Big 10 is better than the Big East, but the top end talent or teams that can actually win it all, I think at the Big East and the Big 12 is a little bit higher. But I think the depth of this league is great. And, you go down the tiers and it's like, okay, Maryland, Purdue, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan State, all tournament teams, no doubt. Indiana should make the tournament. I think they will. Northwestern should make the tournament. I think they will. That's 7. Then on the bubble, it's like, I don't know if I would go Michigan right now, but I think Ohio State could, Rutgers could, Michigan could, like Iowa could. Like that's 10 teams. And so it's like you could potentially see a scenario where the Big Ten has the most teams in the big dance, but maybe it doesn't have the same high-end talent unless somebody joins Michigan State and Purdue at the top, because the Big East has really, really good teams at the top. I mean, I'll pull it up right now. They have Creighton, who I love. They have UConn, who's going to be awesome. Villanova is going to be awesome. St. John's could be awesome. The Big 12 is going to have Kansas again, and Kansas State could be good, and Texas and Baylor are good, and Houston. Like, that's an absurd crew right there. And then the Big 10 is probably right there, right after that.
Isaac Trotter, great stuff to think college basketball here in mid-September. About a month and a half away, man. Appreciate the insight as always, and we'll talk soon.
Anytime.